Okay. Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome or welcome back, as the case might be. My name is Dalibor Petrovic. I'm the founder of the Summit Leadership Alliance and the host to these TechTonic Conversations, a channel where we are bringing to you conversations with Canadian technology leaders and also founders and CEOs of Canadian technology and tech-inspired startup and scale-up companies. And today, on this wonderful and cold Thursday, February 20th, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Mac Gebara. Mac is the co-founder and CEO of Atrium, and Atrium is a leadership development boutique, leadership development firm that is leveraging technology to deliver these services to Canadian leaders and next generation of Canadian leaders. Mac, thank you so much for finding time to be with me this afternoon now. It's a pleasure to have you.
My pleasure, Dalibor. Thanks for having me.
So, Mac, the purpose of these conversations is, of course, to introduce the company itself, but also in the process, learn more about the people who are behind these ideas, people who are driving this innovation and starting our tech-enabled companies in Canada. So what I typically like to do is, instead of introducing my guest, which I would, of course, do a disservice, to pass the baton over to you and to ask you first and foremost to tell us your story and describe how you navigated your life and your career that ultimately led you to be a co-founder of the Atrium and CEO of it.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks again for having me. Super excited to be here. And so a little bit about my story and my background. So originally from Ottawa, actually grew up in a very small town outside of Ottawa, about 1,200 people. And as I graduated high school, moved to Toronto at the first opportunity that I had. Big city, bright lights, land of opportunity, that whole thing. And so moved to Toronto, went to university at TMU, took business and university. And then essentially right out of university over the past 16 and a half, 17 years, I've spent my entire career in the workforce solutions space. And so what that means is I've spent my entire career helping companies attract, retain, manage, and upskill their talent. And that's really across the board, anywhere from executive search on one side of the equation, all the way to the other side, helping Amazon as a client down in the US build upskilling programs to help their folks graduate from distribution centers into the corporate environment. And so just a bit about myself and my journey is absolutely passionate about people. Really, my North Star is helping people get ahead through their careers. And I think it's really important work. I think it's fun work and something I've got a lot of time and energy for. And so that's kind of led me to call it chapter 3 around building and launching Atrium. So my company Atrium in the leadership development space.
Fantastic. And boy, do we need upskilling now, I think more than ever, as people are facing disruption from a variety of factors, including technology. But I think that you absolutely are on the pulse of something that is truly significantly important, and that more and more organizations and more people will be looking exactly for what you are offering, as we realize that the whole workforce is, I think, at the moment where continuous upskilling is essential, right? So thank you for that introduction, Mac. So tell us more about sort of the origin story of Atrium and how you developed it from, that origin story. What is the problem you're solving, and then how did you approach it? How did it all play out?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll share a little bit about the Atrium story. I think there's a couple of cliche founder elements to it. One, I had experience in the talent space, naturally passionate about it. And two, lived experience for my co-founder, Emma and I. And so that lived experience for us that we, started to discuss early on with what seemed like very innocent conversations, was really around the experience we had had. We had worked at incredible organizations, worked for great leaders, and worked for companies who had invested very generously as we continued to level up from individual contributors to having, the great fortune of a seat at the senior executive table. And one thing we just kept coming back to was that although we were super grateful that they'd invested in a lot of what we'll call some of the incumbent or traditional development models, and we had really tried everything, online courses, boot camps, internal mentorship, you name it, we had done it and our company had invested in it. So we're super grateful, but we found like it wasn't the piece that was having the most impact on our development at really critical points in our careers. And what we kept coming back to was we could remember it to the situation, the person, the specific piece of advice we were getting, as that what had the most profound impact on our careers was something that was really easy to understand logically, but super hard to execute. It was the ability to get the right advice, sometimes coaching, sometimes mentorship, sometimes it was tough and honest feedback, and really specifically from the right person at the right time. And where we narrowed in around our experiences, that was typically somebody that was outside of the company, 5, 10, maybe 15 years ahead of us in a similar career path or growth trajectory. So really getting access to somebody who had been in our shoes before, faced very similar growth challenges, and understood our world, but wasn't necessarily in our world. And so for us, that was kind of the original spark behind Atrium in terms of, okay, this is interesting. There's 2 of us, so that's not a lot of data. And so from there, essentially what we did is we went to the market and spent a significant amount of time with 2 cohorts. So cohort 1 was companies. It was anywhere from a small business to banks and everything in between from a scale perspective. And with companies, we heard really, really consistent feedback. 1, every single company will shout from the mountaintops that they believe there's a direct correlation between business performance and the performance and capability of their people, specifically leaders and leadership team. 2, they'd say, we know our people want more. They're asking for more constantly, whether it's in engagement surveys or talking to their managers. We know that our people want more and need more to be successful in today's market.
Like more of support around them. Like when you say more, okay?
Exactly. More support, more tools, and more things that are going to help enable them to be successful in their roles and drive performance of the company. And then the third piece, we called it the shoulder shrug. So oftentimes we would get a shoulder shrug from the folks we were talking to saying, but we're not quite sure what to do or where we go from here. We're building internally what we know how to and have the capacity to from an internal training perspective. We're buying a lot of the models that are being sold to us, whether that be LMS, bringing in external consultants to do boot camps or a variety of other solutions, but we're open to different ways to help support our leaders. And then we went and spent a ton of time with leaders. And so with individuals, that was anywhere from somebody that was a newly minted team lead, leading one person or managing one person, all the way up to C-level executives, Fortune 50 companies. And we heard the exact same lived experience as Emma and I, 99.9% of the time. And so that story was super grateful my company's investing in me.
Yeah.
It's helping.
Yeah.
But by far the biggest impact for me is I typically lean in and say, I've got 1, maybe 2 external mentors.
Yeah.
The issue is I want to spend way more time with my mentor than they can spend with me. And 2, I don't feel like I'm maximizing the learning from that relationship because it's typically infrequent, lacks structure, and has no measurement around it. So oftentimes I feel like I'm leaving a lot of learning on the table, even though I do have access to this person. And so for us, that was really the light bulb moment around how can we help companies accelerate performance through leveling up their leaders and upskilling their leaders, and do so with a model that provides leaders more of what they're telling us has the biggest impact for them, and also what we've experienced in our careers as really impactful for our development and growth. And so that's kind of the backstory behind Atrium and building out the product that we support our clients with today.
Okay, so here is how I would sort of play back what I heard. Tell me. So you spent time to identify the actual market need and gap.
Yeah.
And you spoke to organizations which ultimately will be buyers of your services, I'm going to assume, but also people who will be the audience of your service, the leaders themselves. So what organizations told you effectively is there is a direct correlation between success of our company to success of our leaders. More successful leaders will make my company more successful.
Yeah.
Although it sounds obvious, it's important to call that out because that provides the platform on which to do the next thing, which is that companies are making significant investments in trying to support their people the best way they can, offering, investing in courses, online courses, internal coaching and mentorship. But organizations understand that their people are still asking for maybe not more, but maybe something different.
Yep.
And then when you talk to the individuals,
Yeah.
it sounds like what the individuals are saying is, we really appreciate what the company is investing in, but the biggest impact that I get is when I get to speak with someone who is 10 to 15 years ahead of me in my sort of career domain, and is actually outside of my company, so they can provide me with and perhaps an objective external perspective that is useful. So really, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but that combined with existing programs seems to be this is the opportunity. So,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So now so that's a problem statement and opportunity sort of identification.
Yeah.
And so that was the compelling, that was the that you and Emma got. Now let's build a business around this. So how did that play out? Like what was your solution?
Yeah. Yeah. So essentially for us, there's a couple of anchors in the model that we saw really support some of the challenges that our clients were facing. And a couple of those anchors were, one, around personalization. No two leaders are the same. So
Yeah.
the ability to provide a solution that's really personalized to that individual leader is really important for the effectiveness
Yeah.
of the model and of supporting the development of that leader.
First,
And second piece, access to world-class experts. So the ability for leaders to really learn from world-class experts in their domain that have faced the same challenges, same growth objectives, multiple times before in one-on-one sessions.
Yeah.
And the third piece that's really critical is around the data and insights that are collected along the way, as well as the measurement of the effectiveness and tying that back to business outputs and business outcomes. Those are kind of the three pillars of our model and how we serve our clients today to really effectively help them upskill their leaders, in turn improving performance of the business.
So personalized solution means this is not an online training that you sign up for and listen to a presentation that somebody has recorded, and you spend 45 minutes in the presentation, then you get a questionnaire, you get the questions, if you answered 80%, you get a certificate. That's not what we are talking about here, right?
Yeah, correct.
What we talk about is you spending the time with a client to really understand their personal circumstance, yeah?
Exactly.
And so I'm going to ask you to sort of describe, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to describe how, right, for each one of those.
Yeah.
So that's a step. So step one is to figure out personally what this individual actually needs, where the gaps are, where the strengths are, right? Step two is access to world-class experts.
Yeah.
Step three, data and insights collected around them. And step four, measurements of progress, right?
Perfect.
So shall we unpack these four?
Yeah, of course. Of course, absolutely happy to do that. So I think from a personalization perspective, one of the things that I'll highlight of why it's important is, one of the reasons we see that there's struggles, with some of the broader programs, maybe from an LMS perspective, is they become generic. When something's generic, it's less actionable.
Yeah.
And if you don't act on something you've learned within 6 days, you lose up to 75% of what you've learned. And so
Let's repeat that again.
Yes, the forgetting curve theory.
Yes.
Is if you don't take action within 6 days on something that you've learned, you lose up to 75% of those learnings and knowledge.
Wow.
Yeah. And when something's generic, it's harder to action. And so for us, a lot of focus around action. So the ability to have a leader supported at a very personal level on what's most important for their development or for their business at that point in time, and is really, really critical for them to be able to take action on what they're learning because it's tailored to them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, so
and then I'm going to assume that you're encouraging them, or your product and service encourages them to actually do something about it immediately after the interaction.
Exactly. Okay. So, the idea with the model is that, we've got a personalized plan, one or two specific objectives that they're very focused on that are important to them, but also to the success of the business, tied to business objectives. We're going to pair them with the best expert who's got experience working through those challenges or those key topics previously. They're going to work with them in a one-on-one session. They leave that session, they've gained the knowledge and insights to take actions, make implementation, make changes, whatever they're doing with that journey. And then we're capturing the data and measuring the impact along the way of the time that they've spent with their expert, what they've learned, and also what they've actioned.
Very cool. Very cool. So white glove personalized service. Now, so you explained the personalization, I guess, of this. World-class experts. How does that work? Like, explain, please.
Yeah, we joke it's called matching magic. It's a
matching magic.
It's one of the most fun things that we do. We spend a lot of time up front with these amazing leaders who are looking to take it to the next level. We work with them in discovery, understand like the biggest challenges, what are the things keeping them up at night, what do they need to develop upon, and to continue to grow and help the business grow. And then we pair them with an expert who's been through those similar challenges. So, one of our moments of magic with our clients and leaders is when we actually share the bio of the expert that they're going to be working with. And so as we think about the match, which is a very common question for us, like who are these mystical experts that are going to help us solve all our problems? We find it comes down to a few key things that we uncover in discovery to help make that match. And that's going to be around the specific goals and objectives of the business and of that leader to make sure we've got an expert who has been there and has done that many times before on those specific objectives that we are looking to work through. Two, we're going to understand, what's the ideal industry they're coming from, what's the functional or background, functional area of expertise that they're coming from, what does that mean? Most commonly, VP of sales, we're going to have them paired up with a CRO as an example. So understanding kind of the industry and functional area and that the expert needs to have. And then the third piece, which is a bit of the unsung hero in the equation, is the preferences. So we get really personal with the leader. What's your communication style? We had some people who say, I want an expert who's going to challenge me on every single thing. We get some who say, I want somebody who's going to be really motivational because my job's really hard and stressful. And I want somebody who I'm going to feel great after every session. And so we capture preferences around communication style, around where are you looking to get to in your career? What are your aspirations? So we button up the match with those personal preferences with the leader to make sure we've got the right person to help guide them forward.
That is the thing superbly important because in my experience, what you're describing is sort of is touching on mentorship skills, coaching skills, advisory skills, challenging, like permissions to challenge. So for a client to gain from working with someone like that,
Yeah.
they have to have the comfort to be candid and open, right? And that only can happen if there is some chemistry that occurs between the humans, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah. And then you mentioned, okay, so now the match is made, and
Yeah,
it's a good match,
yeah.
and so what happens then?
Yeah, so we make the match. We set up a chemistry call. So you're right, Ray. We make sure that there's good chemistry between the two of them before they start the learning sessions of their program. And just to give you some insight, a typical learning sprint is 3 months long, where the leader and expert spend 6 hours together, 1 hour every 2 weeks. They're working together, similar to most coaching engagements as well.
Yeah,
And so what they do is they work through the sessions. They work through the specific development objectives. We're capturing feedback throughout the process to make sure if there's any adjustments, any changes throughout that. But essentially, and they spend their time with the expert, focused on those specific development objectives that we've all aligned on. And they work through the sessions, and then at the end of the sprint, and then the 3 months, they've made the progress and improvements. And one thing that I'll highlight, just from an insights perspective, we certainly capture a lot of feedback around experience, satisfaction, do they want to continue? But we also do assessments. So we do assessments at the start of the sprint.
yeah.
We can measure the starting point from a capability perspective against those objectives in the development plan. And then we run that assessment at the end of the sprint. So we've got data and correlation that there's been improvements made on those specific focus areas that we outlined at the start of the sprint.
That is awesome. So in other words, you're making it data driven and measurable. That, when you said measures of success, is that what you mean?
Exactly. That's exactly it. We measure everything. And one of the most important pieces for us to measure is to make sure that the investment that's been made in this leader to support the growth of the leader, but also the business, and it comes to fruition. And so we've built a methodology to be able to measure the impact and the improvements or growth that's happened, through the 3 month sprint with the assessment model.
So now, if you don't mind, let's unpack this a little bit. So when you say you have measures at the beginning and measures at the end, and this is something I understand you guys have developed at Atrium, these measures. I'm going to also assume that these measures, of course, need to be personalized to a person and a circumstance, right?
Correct.
So, is this a survey? How do you do the initial measurement? How do you do the measurement at the end? How do you actually demonstrate progress?
Yeah, exactly. So what we always do is at the beginning, the assessment is typically 180. So usually it's the leader and their boss. So let's say it's a VP of sales we're working with for a sprint. They're going to do self-assessment. That's been the assessment personalized them, tied to the development plan. Whoever they report to, will say the CRO is also going to do that assessment. So we've got data on the starting point of where they're at on those key competencies and capabilities we've outlined as most important for them to learn and develop on. The second piece of that is with some clients, they actually want to see outputs. So they want to see business outcomes or outputs throughout the sprint that are driven by the learnings that are happening with the expert. So for a VP of sales, an example of that could be by the end of the sprint, and the CRO wants to see a presentation with a documented strategy of how to expand into a new market. And so the assessments at the end of the sprint, we're going to measure capabilities again, self-assessment from VP, assessment from the CRO. And then if there was any outcomes or outputs committed to in the program, we also ensure from the CRO that yes, they built the strategy for expanding into XYZ market. Yes, they have delivered the presentation to articulate that strategy to our executive team.
Yeah. So in other words, sorry, go ahead. So sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, not at all. So we capture the capability piece, and then we also offer the option to tie outcomes to it as well, because we think that's really important in the model and in the market.
Yeah. So and the model is based on 3 month sprints, effectively.
Yeah.
And the client works with the coach mentor that comes from your stable of experts. Over the period of 3 months, they're working on specific capability development or leadership skill development, or in your case that you described, it's a combination of development of a skill and creation of an actual artifact.
Exactly.
And then that is used to measure success.
Absolutely. And, a bit of where we see the winning formula is the level of accountability and alignment that happens between, the leader, their boss, the CRO, and the expert. And so there's a strong accountability between the three of them to deliver what's committed to at the beginning of the sprint. And we find that it's been really effective, not only to measure satisfaction, engagement, that the leader enjoyed it, but really that we're providing and delivering meaningful outputs and outcomes for the business, which is ultimately good for the business, but good for the leader's development as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everybody wins in this. So this is fantastic, and obviously you're leveraging technology to do this, to deliver this. I'm going to assume, but let me ask. The pairing between your client and the world-class leader, how does that work in practice? Are these sessions intended to be in person? Are these sessions actually virtual? Do you have a perspective on which one works best? How do you, like, world-class leaders are not all in Toronto, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Although many are, right?
Yeah. So in terms of the formatting, I'll say virtual first. So 98% of the sessions are all happening virtually, through video call, no different than this. There are occasional situations where, there will be in-person sessions or in-person meetups, but predominantly virtual, to help with the flexibility, weaving into to the schedules and calendars of both, the leader and the expert. And so typically it is virtual.
That's pretty neat, yeah. So now, who would be, from your experience, of course, this channel is intended to showcase our Canadian startup and scale-up companies.
Yeah.
And I know you've been in business for about 1.5 years.
Correct.
So who would be your sort of, if you don't mind me asking, like, who is your main audience, your main clients?
Yeah.
Who is your buyer? And in which sort of industries or in which domains do you find most traction?
Yeah. I'm just making a note so I answer all of those. So we've got a bit of diversity in terms of the portfolio and where we support. Our initial mandate with the organization was high growth, specifically a lot of time focused around tech companies.
Tech companies, yeah.
What does that mean? 150 to 5,000 employees. Why? We had a lot of inbound requests for support there because they move quickly, they grow quickly, and that creates a bit of a leadership gap flywheel, constantly promoting, constantly bringing in new folks. So we found that was a real sweet spot for us and still is a big focus for us. Companies like Simple, Maple, Notch, and a number of other Canadian tech companies that we've been working with. And in terms of the model, it does apply across other areas and also into the enterprise. And so as we've spent a bit more time in market, we are starting to work in different industries and some larger scale organizations, whether that's in real estate, some services companies, doing a bit of work in the apparel space as well. And for us, why that's possible is because it's all around personalization. And so if there is a particular industry that we're entering, we have the ability to scale up the network of experts in that industry to meet the specific needs that that client, company, or leader are going to have. And so it's really flexible to be able to shift around, which is great. But that's where a lot of our time is focused. And I'll kind of parlay that into, okay, who's the buyer, who actually buys this thing? And there's a couple of key variables that sit there. One is going to be the size of the organization, and dependent upon whether it's going to be a program that's implemented across the organization or within a specific function or business unit. And so our buyer can go a couple of paths. One, it can be, sitting with the chief people officer, part of the organization, the L&D groups that may be within there. But there are also circumstances where we work with organizations where, we're starting within a specific business unit or geography, where we're working with, say, an EVP of that business unit supporting a number of their leaders or a layer of their leadership team. So it can go in a couple of different directions in terms of who the buyer is going to be.
The buyers are typically chief talent officer, chief people officer, chief HRO officer, chief learning officer, right?
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
the business unit leader who would want their people to go through this experience.
Exactly.
So typically your buyer is not necessarily the consumer of the service. The
Correct.
buyer is the organization or the boss of the consumer of the actual service.
Very well put. Absolutely.
Now, to what degree does that create, to what degree, what I'm asking, how willing are the people going through the program to go through the program, given that it is bought on their behalf by their bosses? Have you observed any challenges and dynamics there, or are people generally keen and willing to take advantage of offering like this?
Yeah, so my response there is, I think like anything there, if you look at some of the profiles of types of learners, there's certainly the very proactive learner that's out there they're the ones that are maybe even bringing us to their boss saying, I want this.
I want this.
Atrium, I want you to sponsor this for me, and I think my colleagues should do it as well. And so there certainly are proactive people that are out there in the market. I think you see that across all development models as well. I think the piece for us that helps with us having really high engagement, and maybe in comparison to some of the other models that are out there traditionally, is the efficiency of it. The fact that almost everybody is looking for advice from someone, and that's a really efficient way for them to learn, problem solve, and grow. And so the challenge typically between getting that and the desire is the friction to get there, to go out and find that right person.
Yeah.
Structure to make sure that it's measured. And so for us, we remove a lot of that friction that helps create a really efficient learning model. And so for us, we've seen, knock on wood, we've seen engagement be really, really high for what we're doing. And so it's been pretty good so far.
Yeah, very good. Excellent. Now, I'm curious about your experts.
Yeah.
How does one become an expert and on the roster of Atrium?
Yeah. So in terms of our experts, one of the learnings that came up, I just think this is fascinating, so I always share it, is we knew we could get okay experts, good people. There's a lot of people that are interested in helping others, but could we get world-class executives who are essentially, arguably, too busy to do this? And one of the learnings that we had was that a lot of really senior, great leaders, great active executives in the market want to give back and help out more. It's just the friction to do it is really high. They get 5 to 10 messages a week on LinkedIn. Can I pick your brain? They have to filter through. They get there. Someone starts asking them questions on topics they're not actually passionate about. They have to schedule. It's very high friction for them to do so. So what we found in terms of building out the expert network was when we showed up and said, you're going to get to help somebody, 5, 10, 15 years junior to you in areas or topics that you're passionate about. We set up all of the scheduling. We define the measurements. We provide structure to it, and it's flexible to your calendar, and you're compensated. That we're able to attract really, really exceptional experts. And I say that because it kind of ties into who the expert network is.
Yes.
I think our original thought was the expert network were going to be a lot of fractional executives, maybe recently retired, with a lot of retirement happening in a number of industries. But we found that, 90% of our experts are actually active executives at other organizations. And this is a structured opportunity for them to give back and help out in areas they're passionate about. and a really flexible format. And
And
so, sorry, go ahead.
this is actually fascinating to hear,
Yeah.
because I actually I was certain that you were going to say my experts are recently retired or semi-retired executives.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is actually no. It's actually people who are in roles.
Yep. Yep. 90% of our expert network, active executives, maybe a couple that are in between roles, but generally
Sure.
speaking, most commonly the expert you're working with is a senior executive at another company.
Wow. Now that is
Yeah.
that there is a superbly powerful. This is a superbly powerful proposition.
Yeah. Thank you.
And these experts, so the experts that you work with, I'm going to assume they go through some form of filtering, some interviews, some checkups, some check-ins, some process to get
Yeah.
onto your roster.
Yeah.
And do these like to how challenging is it for these executives to actually do this while being employed full time by a company? Why? Like, do their companies care? Do their companies put any challenges to these leaders, or like it, or does it actually work smoothly for them?
Yeah, so I think my feedback there is we're very, very diligent about any conflict of interest from a client to expert, expert to client. We do all of our homework, as do our experts. And a lot of them are doing a lot of advisory work already. Typically, they've got a couple of advisory engagements that they're already embarked on outside of their day to day. But they're always making sure that it's vetted by their organization.
Yeah.
So there's no conflict of interest. They're very diligent in that because it's obviously in their best interest. And then how hard is it? I think the key piece here is typically our experts are doing one, maybe two engagements at a time. And so from a time commitment, it's not super, super heavy. And we do a lot of the heavy lifting around the structure and being able to give them specific guidance in terms of what they're going to be focused on. It's very, very simple and efficient for them to teach and share their knowledge through the 6 hours of sessions. We set them up with everything they need to be as efficient and as effective as possible.
That is really good. That is like fantastic. Congratulations, Mike. This is like, as you're describing this, Mike, go, yes, damn, that makes sense. That makes sense. Like everything that you're describing here makes so much sense. So awesome. Um, so is this your first business, or have you started businesses before?
For me, this is the first one I founded as the CEO.
Yeah,
I've had the great fortune of being a part of some really, really great success stories from a business and an entrepreneurial perspective, but not as the founder.
yeah.
But I've been through the journey and the ride before, and did grow up in a bit of an entrepreneurial family as well. So this is my first as CEO and co-founder, but I've been through the journey.
So here is what I would like to ask you. So you
Yeah.
started a company, the company is growing. You have obviously found a very, very important problem to solve, and you're solving it in a very, I think, novel but excellent way. Uh, what have you learned in this process of starting the business and growing the business? Like, what were the biggest things that were maybe positive surprises, and what were the biggest challenges you faced?
Yeah, so positive challenges. So I know there's a big focus on Canada here, so I'll anchor one of the positives in that. I think one of the most beautiful things about the Canadian market, specifically the Canadian tech market, is people are very generous to help and support each other. And so early
Yes.
on in any journey, I think for any entrepreneur in any business, and that's amazing and something that you really need to take advantage of, activate the network. But people are so kind, helpful, and generous to support an entrepreneur, and that I think that's been really amazing to see. And sometimes it's people you don't suspect. As I think the other learning that I'd have there is it may not be the person you have the closest relationship. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's a really strong acquaintance you maybe had in a previous chapter in your career who
Yeah, yeah.
really shows up and comes through to support you. And I think there's something absolutely Canadian and beautiful about that, that I actually don't think is spoken about enough and is a real asset for us. So I think that's been really, really positive and a great learning and fun to participate in and pay forward as well. From a challenge perspective, on the flip side of that is Canadians are really friendly. So a lot of people are going to tell you that they think your idea is really good. And a lot of people are going to say that they support and believe it. And so I think one of the big learnings for us as we ramped up customers was truly spending time to understand what your users and clients do versus what they say. And so for us, I think in any business that you're building, the actual action that comes from clients, from leaders in our case, or users, is really, really important to pay attention to versus what they say. And I think there was a little bit of learning as we started to build out and get set up with our early clients.
Lovely. You're right. These are actually two sides of that same Canadian politeness coin.
Yeah, trade-offs to everything.
Right?
But something that you observe, and some cool learning. But we're learning new stuff every single day, and it's a part of the fun and a part of the journey, which is really great.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So what's the vision? What's the ambition? And where do you want to be taking this? And from your perspective, like what are the biggest challenges ahead of you?
Yeah. So for us, from a vision perspective, kind of ties back to what we spoke about earlier around personalization. Our big piece of our hypothesis is around some of the data that's out there as well. $357 billion spent annually on leadership development and corporate training across North America. 75% of leaders and managers say that they're dissatisfied with what they receive. And for us, a big piece of that hypothesis is around, as development models and products scale, they become more generic.
Yeah.
When they're more generic, they're less actionable. When they're less actionable, they have less impact for both the leader and the business. And so for us, a big piece of the vision is building technology and platform that provides consumer-grade personalization to leaders at scale.
At scale, that's it.
And development for every leader is a big piece of our vision, and that's a really important element of where technology will play a role. And so for us, it's building, the number one leadership development platform in the world that provides personalized learning and development experiences at scale, across the globe.
This is awesome. Now, one question that I actually forgot to ask you.
Yeah.
I will ask you now. The perfect audience, the perfect client profile for you. You mentioned already, ideally someone who is 15 years, let's say 15 years behind the mentor. So to me, this sounds like your perfect target audience are actually next generation leaders, next generation senior executive. Is that like? But why am I answering? Let me ask you. What is that career stage where you feel is a perfect client for your offering that you are actually successful with?
Yeah. So for us, the match and the personalization is really critical. And why I say that is sometimes the best expert is somebody that's 5 years ahead. Sometimes it's somebody who's 15 years ahead. It really depends on where that company is at, where that leader's at, and what's most important for them to focus on from a development perspective.
Yeah.
In terms of the ideal audience or leader that we support, we can move up and down an organization with a lot of flexibility. So we support founders, CEOs, C-level executives. We also support team leads, that have a team of one. So we're pretty flexible there. I'd say most commonly where a lot of time organizations will start with us is most oftentimes at that director VP level.
Yeah.
Really hard time in your career. You got to be in the weeds and also very strategic at the same time. So that's an area. And then one that may be obvious, I think is common, is also around really supporting the top talent. So they're high potential and high performers within the organization. That's another group that is frequently engaged for this, because there's a lot of time, energy, and investment thinking about helping them meet their full potential, but also retaining them, keeping their engagement high as a big priority at the organizational level.
Yeah. That makes sense, actually. And then maybe the last question before I ask you the last question is you used the examples of sales leader reporting to a chief revenue officer as an example. You also mentioned that you already operate in multiple different industries, but that your starting point was Canadian technology companies that are growing from 150 to 5,000 employees. So Canadian tech company, but he said, okay, now we have expanded and we are now also serving clients in different industries. But here's the question. In terms of the content expertise that you bring, I'm going to assume you're experts, that you have experts in variety of domains. Sales would be one you already mentioned. Are there any particular specialty domains that you feel you are strongest in?
Yeah.
And what might those be in terms of your experts, where you match domain expertise to your client?
Yeah, so from an expert perspective, we used to joke that we do everything but legal, but we've started to support some clients in their legal departments as well. So from a functional perspective,
functional.
It really is across the board. It is across the board. Now, what I'll say is, we do see a bit of response from the market. For example, last year, we saw a lot of investment from companies and anything that was going to increase sales, help retain customers. So we saw a lot of activity in sales, customer success, customer support.
Retention, yeah.
What we're seeing this year, as organizations are kind of, especially in tech, kind of shifting back to growth, and there's a bit more of an optimistic outlook in the market. We're starting to see that level out a bit more in terms of the other functional areas, whether it be product, operations to scale for the growth that they sold last year, engineering, really across the board. But in terms of our expert network, we're quite confident in almost all functional areas.
That's really impressive. Yeah. And you are at this stage now after, might I say, only year and a half.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Awesome. So Mac, my last question.
Yeah.
Given all the experience you've had, everything that you've lived through, when you reflect back, what would be your advice to your younger self?
Oh, that's a really good question. Just go for it. Believe in yourself. Get started yesterday. I think would be the big piece. And I would say, some of that ties to a lot of conversations that I'm sure most entrepreneurs have. Is there's a lot of people that might be in their network that are interested in doing something. They have an idea, and so I think that applies to my previous self. I was one of those people. Is just get started. Just go for it.
Go for it.
Happen.
I love it.
Yeah.
Matt, thank you very much, Mac, for your time and for sharing your story and for sharing the story of Atrium and going into this level of detail. I really wanted to sort of explore this. We now have this recorded, and very soon we'll post it on the TechTonic Conversations YouTube channel. And of course, everyone who's interested to learn more about Atrium, this is the place to come and listen to it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dalibor. Really appreciate you having me. Love you're passionate about the space and what you're doing here.
Thank you very much, Matt. All the best to you.
Have a great day.